Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Spark Strategic Thinker. I'm super excited because I'm here today with my fantastic colleague, Melissa Thomas. How you doing, Melissa?
I'm good. Good morning, Heather.
Good morning. So I'm always excited to be able to have time with Melissa, and especially about today's topic, because I oftentimes think that people have, kind of maybe a little bit of a specific skill set that they're really, really fantastic at. And Melissa, you encompass a whole bunch of really awesome skill sets that are very unique usually to one person. And you're like this dynamic package where you have all these great attributes rolled up into one human being. And I love that about you.
Thank you.
So we're going to get started today in our traditional fashion, right? Talking about elements of the dental enterprise value matrix. So we like to focus on elements that drive value in dental practices. And we do this really by sticking to our quadrants that we have found to really be proven to ultimately influence overall performance and ultimately value. So when I was talking about Melissa and her awesome skill sets, whether she likes to admit it or not, right, Melissa, she's very, very good at both the process segment of our quadrants and also the personnel segments. And usually people, those aren't, they're one and two, but Melissa, they are for you. And so I think today's topic is really timely because it fits really wonderfully with your experience, and it's very much needed for the dental world, and that is performance management. So Melissa, do you want to take just a minute and talk to us a little bit about why you think performance management is so important and some of the experiences you've had in your career around this?
Sure. And I think even sometimes what we call it performance management, it can sound scarier than it is. And I think that really it's just a way to make sure that people know what's expected of them. And there's some way for you to check in with them so that they can do what they're supposed to be doing. And it's so beneficial on the leader side and the personnel side because the leader's learning through that conversation, and then the team members really helping to make sure they're doing what they want to do or what they need to do. Because it really, at the end of the day, we throw around the term accountability, but people want to be held accountable. They just don't like that scary word, and they don't want it to feel harsh or infrequent or, all those things that we know aren't the best in a performance management program.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you really truly stated that the leader learns just as much, right? Because I do agree. I think when I look back over my career, I think probably when I've grown most as a leader was really during times where maybe I've been challenged by someone I was responsible for leading. And so performance management, while it's, I think in theory intended to really help create a consistent development path for our teams, the teacher learns the most, right? And so it's kind of a twofold gift. So we're going to touch on a few elements that we found to make performance management a success. And Melissa, I'm going to let you get us started because you've already alluded to the benefit of clarity.
I think that to know, there's a job description, right? Just about every role in the dental practice, there's a job description. But oftentimes it's the one thing that they may or may not sign when they're hired, and that's the end of it. And so throughout the day, even in the dental practice, there's opportunity for people to miss expectations or achieve those expectations, and really just kind of knowing on a day-to-day basis what's expected of me. Did I do it the right way? And if I didn't do it the right way, who's going to help me show me the right way or help explain it to me? And I think that's the foundation of performance management, is setting the expectations and then being able to measure the team member against them. And it's not always bad, right? I think that there's a stigma with performance management that it's only the time that you talk about the bad stuff, the place where they're not meeting expectations. And I know that's a point we'll probably get to here in a minute too, but I think the clarity for both. I remember vaguely one of my earlier performance management conversations when I first became a leader, and I was trying to coach a team member and letting them know that they weren't achieving the expectation. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget the response of that team member going, I didn't know I was supposed to be doing that. And I thought,
yes.
Okay, like you said, that moment where you're like, oh, I don't know what to do from here. And so I learned, okay, let's go back to setting the expectation and that being the beginning of that conversation.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So often we hear people, discussing maybe a team member or a team even that's falling short of what they believe they should be doing, and only to find out that the leader hasn't maybe clearly identified what success looks like, and beyond that hasn't communicated it to anybody. So I think you're spot on there. And also I love the fact that you talked about it being a conversation, right? So it's really an ongoing discussion, because whether you're new to dentistry as a career, or you're new to an organization, or you're trying to continue to grow and evolve as, a longstanding team member, it's really about an ongoing discussion. And if it is an ongoing discussion, it does exactly what you alluded to, which is take the scariness out of it, right? So if you have a process in place that really opens up the door for these ongoing discussion, it helps you to have to avoid any kind of a sit down, either positive or negative, right? So a lot of times people will say, well, I don't really like performance management because when I check in with my team, they think it's the time of year that they're going to get a raise. Well, if it's only done once a year, then it very well could be, perceived as being the compensation conversation, as opposed to a development discussion. And on the flip side of that, if these conversations don't happen as a regular part of, day-to-day activity, then when something maybe does go awry, it does come across as, the big sit down, where it is a bit more negative and disciplinary in nature. And so just building in a process where you're doing check-ins, and depending on, the skill set and the size of your team, maybe these are quarterly conversations, maybe they happen every other month, maybe they happen monthly to get started. And certainly with newer team members, probably more frequently than others, but really coming from a place of an ongoing discussion, and really just the extension of a conversation, makes it so much less scary.
And I think, you touched on just the ongoing nature, and whether it be quarterly, monthly, maybe weekly for brand new team members. One of the things that I learned early on too is that oftentimes I thought I was checking in with my team members because I had talked to them today, or I had a conversation with them in the hallway, or they did pop into my office and ask a question, so I checked in with them. But really, and it doesn't have to be formal, but it has to be protected, almost sacred time, that this is our time to check in. Mm-hmm. This is our time with one another, where I'm going to listen to you so you can bring your list of items for me. I'm going to check in with you, and we're going to have that dialogue. And that kind of leads up to the big, annual more compensation conversation.
Yes, I love it. And so also you talked about your list of items. So one of the things that we've used over the years is truly a check-in form, right? And so it doesn't have to be overly elaborate, but it really creates a framework so that these conversations are most valuable. And one of the tips that we found to be really effective was having both the leader and the team member complete those forms ahead of time. And they both have the same form, right? What's working, what opportunities exist, those kinds of things, which we'll talk more about here in just a moment. But if both parties come with these forms already filled out, and then the discussion really just is around, what perceptions are similar and where do we differ, quite frankly, that really just naturally creates a conversation. And so I'll never forget, a couple of times sitting down with my team members, and only to have them say, well, that's really interesting that you have that on your celebrations list, because I don't necessarily think I do that very well. Or the flip side of that, something that I have on my opportunities list that they actually have on their celebrations list. It's such a non-threatening way to just start a conversation about what I see and what you see, and where we can maybe get closer to middle ground. And so the preparation for these meetings doesn't have to be this great big elaborate, weighted down feeling. It really can be just a short little list of, what's working, what could be improved, and where do we want to go from here, kind of thing. But that intention and that invitation to really truly have it be both parties is really what's key. So Melissa, let's talk a little bit about doctors and whether or not they should be included in performance management discussions. And what has your experience been in this area?
I think that overall it's been tough to, it seems like doctors have been excluded from this performance management conversation when really they need to be included. But there is a perception that if you're not a clinical leader, you can't coach a doctor. And I just don't think that's true, right? You can't coach them on the clinical matters, but you may be able to give them feedback on ways that they can help bring team camaraderie, help bring your team together, or ways that maybe their attitude or behavior shows up differently in the morning huddle, or things that you really need from them to help lead your team. And so I think that I love that you say it's an all team sport, because it is. And I think that it just may look different for a doctor or a hygienist from a provider perspective than it does for a front desk team member.
Yes, I'll never forget that day when I was asked to start doing performance management check-ins with our doctors. And I had the same feeling. I was like, well, I'm not a doctor. I'm not really sure what this should look like. But what I found was that they're a really important part of the team. And sometimes we exclude them in a way that really makes it harder for them to really step into that leadership role, along with you. And we always say that doctors are leaders, whether they like it or not, right? It's just comes in the nature of their title. And for me, also on the flip side, certainly these discussions were very much about the practice and the doctor or team members' contributions to the practice. But I also found that they evolved into me better understanding them as individuals and, some of what they hoped for themselves outside of the practice. And so I can, think back to early on in my career, one of my, younger doctors hadn't been out of dental school for too terribly long, just sharing with me some of his, financial goals. And it was really refreshing for me, because I thought, well, gosh, now that I know what he's trying to accomplish personally, I know exactly what I could do to help align what was happening in the practice with what he wanted to happen outside of the practice. And so I think, again, doctors play this really important role in every dental practice, whether they're an owner doctor or not. And so when we include them in these really valuable processes like performance management, there's so much value that can come from it, and just their perception alone, they want to be part of the excitement as well. So I would definitely advocate for bringing them into the fold.
And I think they're more anxious for feedback oftentimes than we assume, right? Like, I remember doing some observations of patient experiences, and the doctors being the first one in the hallway going, how'd I do? What could I have done better? And you're like, oh, I didn't think you would want that feedback. And so that's always a good thing to feel and see too. But we say doctors included, but I think that also means on the opposite side, being included in the feedback for other team members too.
Yes.
I think that the way that I've seen it historically is maybe the leader in the practice manager, office manager, will do most of the performance management or check-ins with their team members. And if we negate or forget to include the doctor's feedback as well, that's so powerful, especially in the clinical team, and just making sure that the doctor feels included in being able to provide that feedback along with the practice manager. Ideally, they would sit down, in these check-ins regularly with them, but we know that, their clinical time is often a little bit busy. So
yes, definitely. And I think that we also tend to think it has to be all or nothing. So even if your doctor can't be included every time, a couple of times a year, it's so valuable for the doctor's input to be heard. And I always felt a little bit awkward if I was doing a check-in with the dental assistant. Well, how in the world am I supposed to know, how they're progressing and, making individual temporaries or whatever it might be. It felt a little disjointed sometimes to be extending feedback that didn't actually originate with me. So I agree with that. So let's talk about the fact that both parties should really be driving the conversation. And so we've already touched on the fact that sometimes it's a bit easier when, there's the construct of some kind of platform that makes it a little bit easier for everybody to be prepared. And so some of the areas we found that makes sense to focus on really are certainly their role specific skill sets. How are they evolving in the things they're responsible for as a dental assistant or a business assistant or a hygienist or a doctor? And it's interesting, a lot of times, even something as specific as a skill set can have very diverse perceptions, right? And so the way we communicate with patients, or the way we stay on time, or the way we prioritize tasks, whatever it might be, that can be left up for interpretation in a lot of ways. And so really just creating that space to have those discussions. Some other things that we found beneficial to talk about are really making sure, that each team member understands the goals of the practice and how they actually contribute to the success or shortfall of those goals. And then probably most important, even though it's at the end of the list, is really how that team member is living up to the values and vision of the organization. So, are they a good teammate? Are they really living up to who we say we are and the specific behaviors we've identified that support the values of our company? And so that's a really great place to start. What are some of the other things, Melissa, that you've seen as topics of conversation for these ongoing discussions?
I love that you said values really shouldn't necessarily be last. And I think that it's a great opportunity. So many times we got questions from our practice managers and coaching sessions where we would really help coach them on how to coach their team members is, well, how do I bring up the discussion about their attitude or their negativity or their eye rolling or their lack of being polite to their team members, if you will. And so it was so much easier to frame those conversations into the values line. How are you being, supportive by building relationships? Well, you're not if you're doing this and this and this. So I love that, keeping that in mind, that's a great way to tie back some of that maybe more constructive coaching. But really kind of flipping from that constructive side to celebrating the successes. I love that it's an opportunity to reiterate to your team members how great of a job they're doing in so many ways they might be oblivious to, right? And so I think that one of the things too that I think is a good tip, if you will, is that anything that happens in a coaching conversation, performance management conversation, it likely shouldn't be the first time that the team member is hearing about it. So don't wait until your formal sit down or your once a week check-in to say that you did a great job on that temporary, or you did a great job greeting that patient. Whatever it is, celebrate, but then also keep that on a kind of a running total list, if you will. I used to keep a little list because I was very particular about specifics, because specifics matter when you're celebrating and when you're giving opportunities. If you can't explain to the team member the exact scenario and maybe how you would have done it differently, it just sort of falls flat, right? And the same with great job yesterday. Well, what did I do yesterday that was so great? And so I think even just keeping like a running list for team members on the successes that you want to be sure to celebrate is a great.
I think that's so important. And I love your commitment to the specificity, because you're exactly right. So many times we think dentistry and performance in dentistry just happens, right? Like, well, that just happened to be a good day, or, oh, that wasn't such a great day. Let's try to avoid that moving forward. But if you don't know what made it great, or if you aren't really sure what, led to, the less than great performance, really hard to figure out how to repeat it or how to avoid it. And again, going back to, point number one, people perform best with clarity. And so when they're really clear about what you think is working well, or, what could be done just a little bit better, well, then they have so much more, ability to really figure out what they need to do even more of what's going well, or a little bit less of what isn't. So I think that's exactly right. And once you're able to distill all of those items, down into specifics, you can create a plan. This time of performance management really is for the roadmap for their ongoing development and success as a team member, or future growth opportunities. And so it's important to celebrate success, identify opportunities, but probably what people crave even beyond that is really just understanding what their future looks like. And so even if they, if their goal is to truly just be the best dental assistant they can be for the next, 5 years of their career, that's okay. But to have clarity of that plan is really important, because as a leader, it helps you to identify the support they're going to need from you, or from their colleagues, or opportunities outside the organization. I think we sometimes underestimate the excitement that opportunity brings to people's lives. And so whether it's the opportunity to take on, you know, a separate little initiative in the practice, or something as simple as like planning the holiday party, whatever it is, really just identifying ways to keep your team engaged. I think that's where the magic starts to happen. And as we know, everything starts at the top. Everything is leadership. And so as an ongoing, really exceptional leader, Melissa, what final strategies or tips would you give everybody from a leadership perspective to really ensure performance management is a success?
I think, you know, the final word would have to be just commit to doing it. And if you're the type of person that needs to put them out on your calendar every week, or if you want to do, you know, every morning, maybe it's determining what works best with your team member, because we know it's challenging, especially when you get into the practice. You may have 10, 15 team members, and all the dental assistants are very busy. All the VAs are very busy. So maybe it's not a set time that is every week. It's when your schedule opens up today, let's sit down for 15 minutes and just check in. Just commit to doing it, and you'll find that those conversations add so much value to your team, and yourself, and really the results in your practice.
Absolutely. That whole saying about good and done is better than perfect and undone, right? And so I do think people get busy, and then they see, they recognize, oh, I haven't done, a check-in for 2 months. Well, now it seems awkward to do it. Well, no, it's okay, right? It's okay if it's been, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, or never. There's really no time like the present. And if I could really go back and give my younger leadership version advice, it really would be just exactly what you said, Melissa, committing to staying connected to my team in that way. I think when I look at times where things weren't running as smoothly as I'd like, usually it was because of lack of clarity, lack of communication, lack of expectations. And when those things are missing, our confidence drops, and no one performs well when their confidence is low. So just the opportunity to create that clarity and have that discussion that doesn't typically take place during the course of a busy day really just fills everybody's bucket. So I think that's wonderful. All right. So with that, I'm going to wrap us up, and thank you so much, Melissa. Always enjoy our time together talking about people and processes. And for everybody else, we look forward to seeing you again on the next session of Spark Strategic Thinker. Just conversations to keep your mind moving and really spark the way you think about things you're already doing or things you maybe haven't done and maybe should start doing moving forward. Ultimately, all to improve patient experience and team member experience and drive value in our dental practices. So thanks, Melissa, and we'll see you guys again soon.
Bye.